Do you ever catch yourself talking out loud when no one else is around, maybe explaining something to yourself, replaying a conversation, arguing with an imaginary person, or simply saying, "Okay, first I need to do this, then I'll deal with that," and then suddenly realizing what you are doing and wondering, is this normal? In most cases, yes. Talking to yourself is a normal form of self-talk, and it does not automatically mean that something is wrong with you. In fact, the way you talk to yourself can reveal a lot about how your mind processes information, manages emotions, prepares for situations, and understands itself. So if you often talk to yourself when you are alone, you may recognize these 4 traits. The first trait is that you may process your thoughts better out loud. Some people can keep an entire problem inside their head and organize it silently, while others understand their thoughts much more clearly once they hear themselves say them. When an idea stays inside your mind, several thoughts can compete for attention at the same time, so you may know that something feels wrong without being able to explain exactly why, but the moment you start speaking, you are forced to turn those thoughts into actual words, and suddenly the problem becomes more structured. This is why you might catch yourself saying things like, "Wait, that doesn't make sense," or, "Okay, what am I actually trying to do here?" You are not necessarily talking because you need another person to hear you. You may simply be using your own voice as a thinking tool. It can happen while working, studying, making a decision, looking for something you lost, or trying to understand a complicated situation, and before you know it, you are asking yourself questions, answering them, disagreeing with your own answer, and trying again. From the outside it might look like a conversation with nobody, but inside your mind you are organizing information, and sometimes saying a thought out loud immediately exposes a problem you could not see before. An idea may sound perfectly reasonable in your head, but once you hear yourself explain it, you realize there is a missing step, a contradiction, or a much simpler solution. So for someone who naturally processes information verbally, self-talk can make thinking feel clearer and more manageable. The second trait is that you may use self-talk to regulate your emotions. Think about what you actually say to yourself during stressful moments, because you might hear yourself saying, "Calm down, it's fine, just get through this part, you already know what to do," or even, "Why am I getting so worked up about this?" That conversation with yourself can create a small psychological distance between what you feel and what you do next, so instead of immediately reacting to frustration, fear, embarrassment, or anger, you give yourself a moment to respond. In a way, it can be similar to how you would speak to a friend who was overwhelmed. You might remind them that the situation is temporary, help them focus on the next step, or tell them that one mistake is not the end of everything, and some people naturally do something very similar for themselves, except they say it out loud. Of course, self-talk is not always positive, because you can also criticize yourself, replay embarrassing memories, or make a stressful situation feel even worse, and that is why the language you use matters. Saying, "I always ruin everything," creates a very different mental state from saying, "That went badly, but I can figure out what to do next." If you regularly talk yourself through difficult moments, your mind may be using language as a way to turn emotion into something you can understand and manage. The third trait is that you may mentally rehearse situations before they happen, and this is probably one of the most familiar forms of talking to yourself. You imagine a future conversation, someone says something, you respond, they answer, and suddenly you are already several minutes into a discussion that has never actually happened. Sometimes this rehearsal is practical because you may be preparing for an interview, an important phone call, a difficult conversation, a presentation, or any situation where you want to choose your words carefully. Speaking your response out loud allows you to hear how it sounds before another person hears it, which can make you feel more prepared and help you notice things you would change. But mental rehearsal can also happen automatically because your brain is constantly trying to predict what another person might say, how you might respond, what could go wrong, and how you would handle it. In moderation, that can be useful because you are mentally practicing the situation before entering it, but the problem begins when rehearsal turns into endless prediction, and instead of preparing for one realistic conversation, you start generating 10 possible conversations, 20 possible reactions, and eventually situations that may never happen at all. So if you often act out future conversations when you are alone, it may mean that you naturally think ahead and prepare through simulation, which can be useful as long as you notice when preparation quietly turns into overthinking. The fourth trait is that you may be highly self-reflective. People who frequently examine their own behavior often have an ongoing conversation with themselves, asking questions like, why did I react like that? Did I actually mean what I said? Why does this bother me so much, or, what should I have done differently? These questions are not really about talking, they are about observing yourself. Instead of simply experiencing an emotion and moving on, part of your attention steps outside the experience and tries to understand it, so you notice your own patterns, question your motives, analyze your reactions, and sometimes even challenge your first interpretation of what happened. This can help you learn from experiences that other people might simply forget, because a difficult conversation becomes something you analyze, a mistake becomes information, and a strange emotional reaction becomes a question you want to understand. There is, however, an important difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection eventually gives you something useful, such as a clearer understanding, a decision, or a lesson, while rumination keeps returning to the same thought without producing anything new. If your self-talk helps you understand yourself and then move forward, it can be useful, but if you keep repeating the same conversation for hours while becoming more upset every time, your mind may no longer be solving the problem, it may simply be stuck inside it. So if you talk to yourself when you are alone, it does not automatically mean that you are strange. You may simply be someone who processes thoughts verbally, regulates emotions through language, rehearses situations in advance, or spends a lot of time reflecting on your own mind. The more interesting question is not whether you talk to yourself, but what those conversations are actually doing for you, because sometimes the person you speak to most often is also the person you are still trying to understand.